it's to let you navigate through on your end.
Oh, no, you're good. So this context for this particular issue is that I think it was 12.10, we shipped the project labels, and I think you did the engineering on that, right? Do you recall?
And Rob, I think he worked. I think he's starting off with that, and Gian as well. I think it will have across that.
Yeah, so we implemented that feature, and the intent there was, let's give customers a way to label the projects that they care about, like in a compliance context, so that we could then have flexibility, like what you did with the instance level merge request approval rules, where we say, apply this disruptive policy only to regulated projects. So that worked great. We got really positive feedback from that. But then we had follow-up feedback that said, basically, oh, this is great, but I also want to be able to label projects as maybe having specific environments like AWS or Google Cloud. Maybe I want to label specific things like, oh, this is a Linux application, or like a Linux environment versus Windows. And so we got into the topic of like, well, we have project topics, and maybe we just iterate on that to improve that feature. But then there was this overlapping effort where the compliance pipeline configuration, we'll call it initiative, and the recent proposal basically says, as part of the solution, use custom CI configuration path. Well, one of Sid's main concerns was, we don't want this to apply broadly. This should be refined in some way that it's as least disruptive as possible. And so it felt like those two went hand in hand. Here we have customers asking for the ability to customize labels that we were going to use to reduce the scope of this compliance pipeline configuration. And then here we have this premise of like a custom CI path. And so we thought, what if we just enable customers to do that customization of the compliance labels? And so talking through that, we ended up mostly on Word that we see this proposal. I don't think we've come back to it just yet, but the reason that custom CI config path is there is because we thought, well, if they want to define HIPAA, and so to avoid a breaking change, we could say, take those 5 hard-coded framework labels that we added and just make them editable as part of this customizable area, and add an optional field for custom CI path. And so every project that you label with SOX, for example, if you define a custom CI path to like TANs group / TANs project / tan.gitlabci.yaml, then every project with that label would call out to that external or that custom CI path in addition to their local YAML file. And the thinking there was, in that tan.gitlabci, which is outside of the local project being controlled by the compliance team, you could specify different rule sets to say, run this rule set for this project namespace and this rule set for this, or label even. And so that was just one of the like crossover opportunities we found. And I think the reason I mentioned it in that group level merge request approval rules is because we were talking about the, I guess, the inheritance pattern and how we built it for the instance level merge request approval rules, or settings, I should say. And so I think I was raising that issue for your awareness to say, hey, like maybe there's some way we can leverage these labels in conjunction with that inheritance model, or to supplant that inheritance model with something different, based on the new criteria we've been given around, hey, I want to set something at the root group level and then have that recursively applied down into every subgroup and project. So hopefully that all makes sense. I know that was a bit of a brain dump, but it's a lot of moving parts, at least in my head.
Yeah, I can see the motivation behind label as well. Together, it gives a little bit more flexibility. But also, I think I can think of it's a 2 path here, where one that we're talking about is recording what the metadata that the compliance framework have, or a labels or compliance label can have, and the other part was applying those rules to other areas, like whether that's going to be saying, you know, MR approvals or push rules and things like that. So this one, we're talking, oh yeah, I think it's more on how we record the data or thing that relates to compliance framework. And the one that prior to this, this one here, the group level merge request approval rules are on the application path. So taking the data that we recorded that attached to the labels or compliant labels, and then apply it here. So they're actually contributing to the end user experience of having this apply or inheritance gone through. But I think that's the two different problems that we're trying to kind of tackle. So at the moment, if we're taking the frameworks what recorded, we still can run with this role. So assuming that's recorded at the instance settings, I think.
When you raise another point that I forgot to mention, one of the reasons I brought this up was because the paradigm of toggle something and then enforce it only to compliance labeled projects right now would be really ugly, because we'd have to copy paste that little subsection where we say, okay, now I want to set these default approval rules, but I only want to apply them to, you know, SOX, HIPAA, PCI. And so like having to copy paste that experience everywhere just doesn't seem like the best UX.
Okay.
And so what I hope is achievable in some future state is when customers define these custom project labels, they can say, they can like fully load it and say, okay, I'm going to define something called, let's call it PCI-EU. So maybe it's like specific settings for a combination of the PCI standard as well as some EU laws or regulations. And so in there, I could foresee they have some ability to say, you know, set these default merge request settings, point to this custom CI path, prevent project maintainers from changing any settings, or, you know, something like that. So instead of having to copy paste this framework selection everywhere, we have them define those common theme settings in this one place. And then every project they apply that label to would then apply those controls and say, okay, maintainers don't have their normal permissions. The CI pipeline is going to be, or the pipeline is going to be comprised of both this local and external configuration file. There are a set of default merge request approval rules in terms of like actual approval rules, in addition to the settings like authors can't merge it or approve it, whatever it is.
Gotcha.
But yeah, that was what I was thinking of, and the reason I wanted to bring that up to you in that comment was because I think at this point, you're basically like the expert on the inheritance model with the work that we're
we have various different ways too, but
yeah, and I just wanted you to have your brain turning on it, because you are most likely to find the opportunity for us to do it in whatever is likely the best path forward, so that we're not copying and pasting the same UX everywhere. We can achieve what customers want in terms of like in this issue, if you scroll a little bit further down, he talks about like, I want to set these policies at the root group level, and I want it to automatically inherit down, but subgroups and projects should be able to change those settings. And I think that's like I think that's a good path, because then later we can figure out like, okay, how do we lock these down for compliance or regulated projects? And to me, that seems to be in line with our values of, it's not disruptive. It is convenient because they can apply a standard, but then local group owners and project maintainers can change it to their needs. But then later we can introduce the very selectively disruptive enforcements that allow the owners or admins to enforce things for this small handful of projects that they want to regulate.
Yeah.
Does all that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. I think where the other thought I have in relates to compliance is the way I think of it's conceptually, it's it's a container of a way you can group settings. And if I can think of it's, I think I've posted up here, but I'm keen to hear your thoughts. And so we have project and then group and instance. If you don't have compliance in that space, you have projects inherit from groups, inherit from instance. Now compliance introduced an interesting dynamics here. So we have, so I'm kind of thinking maybe in, you know, compliance somewhere in between groups and instance, where you can say, you know, project inherits from group and inherits from compliance. If you have instance, that might be high up, so that's compliance inherits from instance, but maybe not the right move there. Compliance may be a little bit more, it's a bit stricter than what we have for instance, because I'm not sure if you want people to change it after you kind of set or even overrides. If you say you're compliant to a standards, whether you allow, you know, people at the project level to override. So that's something we might have to consider, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think these are two different use cases, if not more, for two, if not more types of customers, regulated customers. So like the customer in this issue who says, hey, I want to set it at this top level, have it inherit down, but anyone can change it. I think they're in agreement that yes, there should eventually be some mechanism that lets me prevent certain projects and people from changing these settings. But I think for now, it's the first problem, which is I don't have a way to automate or standardize a common set of project settings that I can just have exist or inherit down, where I don't have to do a bunch of manual work or custom tooling with an API to make those changes. And then the second problem would then be, okay, now that I can like automate and standardize this project template essentially, or the settings template, now I want to have that apply on new projects or inherit down. And I don't want maintainers in this project over here to be able to change that. And I think that's where the compliance labels could come in.
Okay. Yep. Gotcha.
And I could almost kind of see just like a, I don't know, random thought. Maybe it's in the compliance dashboard, but like a control panel where you specify that like any project with a compliance label should have this default profile. And maybe that's maintainers can do X, Y, and Z things, but they can't change any of the project settings, and they can't change or do certain actions that maintainers normally could do. Any label or any project with a compliance label, X, Y, and Z. But that needs to be thought through.
Yeah, gotcha. It's an interesting problem to solve, isn't it? To put out a curveball here, for merge request approvals, the way that it's structured is different from push rules. So it can't simply, like from the technical standpoint, to slide it the same way as push rules, which I think was not right. Like it should be kind of structured in a similar way. So that's why we don't have to kind of repeat the same effort. To elaborate on that, I think push rules are all actually stored in the same tables, where merge request approvals actually be in different tables. So there's the extra effort to kind of aggregate these rules at the time where the projects or at the MRR level approval settings apply. We have to aggregate or jump between different tables to get to the end result, where push rules are actually done inside one table, so it's more performant. So I'm with you that as well. Like I can see that beneficial to bring it like the standard set of how we do inheritance and and overrides.
Yeah, well, and I think too, one of the lessons learned between the instance level MR rules that you built and the group level push rules and just group level anything is I think we should probably start focusing first on group level. One, because it caters to both .com customers and self-managed. Two, because I think that the group level is ideally where a majority, like 90% plus, want the control anyway. And it's only going to be the minority of customers, which we could then do small, quick iterations eventually at the instance level to give them that level of control. And I don't think we would have learned that if we hadn't have done what we've done so far. But I think where I see the instance level merge request approval rules going potentially is we treat that area of the admin panel as sort of this, I don't know, maybe like Jeremy raised a great issue around doing like a compliance check. And so maybe we take those checkboxes and we add on to it. And maybe we do like a library of common settings and we say like, hey, like check all the settings that you want to ensure are enabled across your instance. And we then use that as some frame of reference to measure against and say, okay, you've told us that these 32 settings should be enabled or have these values. And now we're going to go look at all of the projects in your group or all the regulated projects in your group or namespace to let you know which ones are compliant or which ones have violations and stuff like that. So I think there's still a cool opportunity in that regard. But then that's one of those where like maybe we have to bring it to group at some point for .com, and it goes back to your point from earlier in this call where we say, you know, it needs some place between group and instance level. And I think Melissa in the Access group is working on a workspaces construct, I think. Or work group, I think it was workspaces, but yeah, a lot of really tough problems to solve.
I think if we treat those, at least even just at the data store level, having these in one place and, you know, just store, you know, might request approval settings. So these are the settings that apply for compliance A, Y, Z, and then this is the compliance apply for group. And then we can figure out, you know, within how it's kind of, how the rules are, you know, at the later points. At least we're recording this in the same place. Same for push rules. That's what happened. I think we had it all kind of in the same tables and there. If you happen to change the way the rules apply, like whether that's group come first or compliance come first, it's really easy. Feel like less moving parts where, you know, merge request approvals, I think it's traditionally we have it in two different places.
Oh, that startled me because I was sitting in the dark.
Oh, wow. Don't open the door. He's inside the house already.
They just see a person walking their dog and they're, hey, come here. Anyway, sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, I think it's. I think if we can get them kind of all stored in the same place, it's making the interpretations of these rules a little bit easier. At least we don't have to touch how it get written. But just focus on the read parts is how we interpret these rules. You can play with different rule engines if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should spend some cycles thinking through that. If you feel, oh, go ahead.
Have you have a chance to look through what the mass integrations have been? was
I
kind of
did
heading.
look through it a bit.
Yeah, because it feels very similar, but I haven't actually gauged what what the implications are from product point of view.
Yeah, I can maybe schedule a call with, if it's ecosystem, that'd be Patrick Dooley, and just pick his brain on it a bit, because I'd like to spend some cycles on it with you and Dan or whomever, and think about what it is you're talking about, because there's another issue I created around creating this risk library where the initial thought is customers could define, let's say there's a line item and says, merge requests opened that have only one minimum required approval is a risk score, like has higher risk than one that requires more approvals. That's probably not the right way to define those, but something like that, where we create this library that we can then say, okay, once we've defined what risk looks like within GitLab, then when we create an issue, when we open an MR, when we merge that MR, when we take certain actions, we can assign risk ranks or weights to it. And I think that's going to require some underlying consideration around what does that schema look like, and how do we deal with those relationships. And then similarly, we eventually want to build out a mapping between things like all of the controls in the PCI DSS and settings and configurations in GitLab. So I think we're doing a lot of work that's going to involve these relational or relationship type of considerations, and it's probably good for us to start now, even just kind of like slowly and chipping away what we think this could manifest as, whether it's one or n number of these different models. But I think group push rules and instance level anything and all of the inheritance involved there is already proving difficult. And I'd like to get ahead of that if we can, because it's only going to get worse as we go forward.
The multi-tenant kind of move. And I think naturally we tend to fall into group level for a lot of things. Yeah, I think it's good to have common standards, or at least how we approach it, even from the customer perspective, to make it easy for them. Because I don't know, it's if we just have trouble explaining it, like drawing this table and then having that rules in the code. Feel like it's really hard to see how we can get the customer to use or even understand how the rules work.
Yep, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Let me stop the recording here real quick.
Yeah.